is Alina, and you're listening to Your PharmD Bestie. So, hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Your PharmD Bestie. Today, I have another very special guest. Her name is Keya. She is an underclassman, a current pharmacy student, year 3 at UCSF. I'll have her introduce herself in just a moment, but we are going to be divoting a little bit from the residency talk and going a little bit more into fellowship. So I'll have Kaya introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. So, as Lena mentioned, my name is Keya, and I'm currently a P3 at UCSF. Originally was born in Toronto, but then my family moved over to Chicago, which is the city I consider home now. Really, what brought me to SF was UCSF and wanting to have the opportunity to look at both clinical pharmacy and industry pharmacy and kind of have those opportunities to pick between what I wanted to do with the rest of my pharmacy journey. I will say Alina was a big part of me moving to SF and me starting my journey at UCSF, and a big reason why I decided to commit to the school. And it's been 3 years and I have no regrets about moving to San Francisco. And so grateful for my friendship with Alina and just all the people that I've met here and all the experiences I've had. But, I am so happy that she asked me to talk about fellowship today. Welcome to the dark side, as they like to say, or what I like to call the fun side. Um, but yeah, happy to answer any questions about fellowship.
Thank God. I was like, oh my gosh, I hope you don't regret this decision. 'Cause I was like introducing you and I like remembered that, oh my gosh, like we met before you even started. Um,
Yeah, it's so
and then,
crazy, right?
yeah, time has passed for sure.
It
But look
really
at you now.
has.
Feels like I like watched my kid grow up, kind of.
Aw. No, it does feel like that and like all the memories and I miss it. I miss having you here in SF with us. Come
I'll
back.
come visit. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. In terms of the dark side, though, which actually I remember hearing people call fellowship that, but why? What's the whole background behind the dark side versus fun side?
I think a lot of people have some misconceptions about pharma and its goals. And, I will say that prices and costs of medications are very high in America. And, a lot of people kind of point to pharma and big pharma as the reason for that. But I think, what people kind of also fail to acknowledge is that a lot of our innovation and drive in medicine really comes from the pharmaceutical industry. And a lot of that innovation is fueled by dollars. And so, there's a large amount of revenue that needs to be generated for research and development and for these new drugs to come out so that we can cure new and old disease states. And so, I can get and see why people call it the dark side, but I think a lot of us who are working in pharma just really have that drive and ambition to improve health outcomes at a population level. And that's really what brings us into work today is that passion to do better for such a large number of people.
Thank you for the answer. Has anyone told you that you could be a news reporter?
No, but thank you.
That is a compliment.
I
But yeah,
appreciate
I sorry to pivot, but totally understand where you're coming from. I think when I was in my appy year pursuing my clinical rotations, there was a brief moment where I had a rotation working in an independent pharmacy, and a lot of discussion is around where the money goes, big pharma companies, what is their motive, etc. But I think also having known and talked to so many people from pharma, it's a whole other aspect of pharmacy that is needed in all honesty. And I'm very grateful to have people like you in that industry, our Department of Pharmacy, who are willing to devote their time and efforts into helping to improve health outcomes. So appreciate that answer. I guess you dove a little bit into like why fellowship, but could you talk a little bit more about what really drew you to fellowship over other pathways in pharmacy like residency, and what were there specific experiences that you had that really helped you finalize that decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say that, when I moved to San Francisco and I accepted my admission at UCSF, I was really like clinical pharmacy bound, and I really wanted to pursue residency at the time. Although, no, I think every pharmacist is a clinical pharmacist. So just to kind of add that in. But yeah, I really came here with the hopes of wanting to pursue residency, and what better place to do it than the birth of clinical pharmacy here at UCSF. So, my first year, I really devoted my time to learning more about residency and how to be best prepared for it, and really trying to get involved in RCOs, in organizations on campus that would gear me towards that path. And then I think my second year, I felt that I had kind of set myself up well for to go the residency route. And that's when I decided that, as a student, you really have the opportunity to have an open mind. And this is the best place to learn about all your options, because as you get older and you are committed to a certain specialty or field, those options become more limited, and the education that's at your fingertips also becomes limited. And so I really wanted to take advantage of all of my opportunities being at such a large school, with so many different options. And I started to look into industry a little bit more. I'll be honest, I had started to hear whispers of industry pharmacy right before I moved to San Francisco when I was still in Chicago. And I knew that there was some pharma companies that were located here in the Bay Area. And so that's another reason why I did choose SF. I felt like, I could do the clinical route, but still have the opportunity to look into what industry means if that was going to be an option for me later on in my career. So I always wanted to end up in pharma, but for me, it was going to be more of like a mid career switch rather than right off the bat. And so I think what really, changed the game for me is in my second year, I was on the team for the VIP case competition through IFO, or the Industry Pharmacists Organization, Value of Industry Pharmacy case competition. So I was on the commercial and marketing team, and I learned so much about the drug development process and what it really means to be an industry pharmacist and what kind of work they do. And although it was, not in an actual industry setting, I would say the competition, and the way our team at our school participates in the competition very closely resembles what actually happens in a pharmaceutical company. And I was able to realize how closely that experience emulates it. But after I had my API rotation at Gilead, and that was in medical affairs. And so, really, during that rotation, during those 6 weeks, I was able to learn so much about what an industry pharmacist does in medical affairs, and also what other roles pharmacists have within a pharmaceutical company. And I think those two key experiences are really what solidified the fact that, this is my calling, like this is what I want to do, this is where I best see myself, this is where I feel like the skills that I already kind of have will be best suited to a role working in a more like corporate style environment rather than an inpatient setting. Although I will say I loved my inpatient rotations, I will definitely miss my direct patient care experiences and building rapport with my patients. I will miss all of those things, but I feel like this is the way that I can have the impact that I came into pharmacy wanting to have.
Thank you for sharing that. So, I think all of this talk about industry and fellowship and why you decided to go down that pathway, we haven't even talked about where you matched for fellowship. Are you comfortable sharing the exciting news? Because I also
Absolutely.
want to talk about like the application process for it, but I think there's a lot of backing or reason why I wanted to invite you to talk for this podcast because again, like really proud of your journey and like where you've come to and where you're going to be going. So I'll have you share the news to the audience.
Oh, thank you, Alina. Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity. So, yes, next year I will be a fellow. I will be a fellow through the University of Southern California Fellowship Program in partnership with Gilead Sciences. So I will be the inaugural Global Medical Affairs Fellow in HIV Prevention.
Ooh, HIV prevention. Okay.
I know
I
that's
didn't
a
know that
lot
they
of
had like
words.
specific fields for that. Okay, that's very cool. So, in terms of when you were applying for fellowship, could you talk a little bit more about the timeline? What did that look like? When did you start the application?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like one aspect of the fellowship process that's really nice is, and this may also be kind of similar to residency in that you kind of know ahead of time what materials you need to prepare for, and it's going to look pretty similar year to year, so you know what to anticipate. In terms of like when to begin the process, I think the process really begins in the spring before you are going to officially apply. So, application season officially opens up in the fall. But I think, really starting to gear yourself up for success a few months before that is a good idea. So, what I think the first steps are is in the springtime, try to have one on ones with fellows in the roles that you're interested in. And maybe you don't know which companies or which positions you are interested in quite yet, but I think that's like the great thing of talking to those fellows and connecting with those one on ones, whether that's like, cold messaging on LinkedIn, or if you have a friend or someone else who can kind of connect you just to learn a little bit more about what their experience has been like and what they do. And I think that can be really informative for one, if you feel like the company is a good fit for you, two, if that functional area is something that interests you, three, if that position in and of itself, those work and responsibilities are things you would be interested in. I think this is all like good information to kind of gather for yourself ahead of time. And the reason why I say to do it early is so that then moving forward, you kind of know what you're looking for in terms of what's important to you when you're looking to apply, but also just kind of getting a general sense of what you're going to apply in. And then these one-on-ones earlier, the earlier you do it, the more time the fellows kind of have, because later on in the season they get super swamped with like applications, and also everyone's reaching out kind of last minute. So if you can do it earlier, that's great. So that's step one. And then I think step two is looking out for the drug company brochures. So the brochures typically come out in August, I would say, for a lot of companies, and the brochures are basically just like these packets of information that list a lot of information about the fellowship program for that company, but also which positions are offering for that year. I will say year to year fellowships can change, so some can be added, some can be taken away. It really is all dependent on the company's budget for the year, and so that's why things are always changing. So keep an eye out for that. Look for those updated brochures. You can always look at previous year's ones if you're trying to get an idea for some roles and responsibilities and get an idea of the functional area, or learn more about the company. So that's always a good idea too. But look out for the new brochures in August time, and also start taking a look at what some of those program deadlines is so that you can best prepare your time. Because I know that, for me and all my fellow classmates that were applying for fellowship, all of our rotation schedules look different. So some of us were like in acute care rotations right in the thick of application season, whereas some of us were already done with our acute care rotation, so we had more time to focus on our application. So you want to make sure that you can manage your time wisely, because I will say the actual window for applying for fellowship is pretty small. So applications usually will open early October, at least for the big ones like Rutgers, and USC. Those applications will open like early October, and they usually only stay open for about a week. I know for sure for Rutgers. And then USC, I think it's open for a little bit longer, or maybe also a week. There's also other fellowship programs like MCPHS and Northeastern. Northeastern has an earlier timeline. I believe their application opens up in like September. So that's why I think it's really important just to keep track of all those deadlines so that you can make sure that you meet them, because a lot of people will say you want to try to get your application in on the first day that it opens up because it's super competitive. And so there's like hundreds of people applying for the same position or for the one position that's available. And so you definitely want to make sure that you can get your application in earlier so that they can read it, since most of these places take applications on a rolling basis. So I would say that's kind of like the beginning steps. And then, there's interviews that start late October and go all the way up to ASHP mid-year. So most of your interviews will probably be online, especially the first few rounds. But just keep in mind that a lot of these places have multiple rounds. One company I interviewed with had like 6 rounds. Others typically usually have 3. Some will do final rounds at ASHP mid-year. Some will bring you on site to the company to interview. So it just looks very different for every company. So just stay aware. The applications materials that you need to apply are usually a letter of intent, 3 letters of recommendation, and a CV. So you kind of know these are the things that every year they expect for you to have to apply, so you can get an idea, start thinking in the summer of who you want your letter recommenders to be. You can start making sure your CV is up to date. You can start thinking about what you would want to say in your letter of intent. So I think a lot of it is not things that will be surprising in terms of the application process.
Wow, lots of great advice. Thank you for really breaking that down and explaining the process. Especially, I really like the advice that you gave at the beginning about, reaching out to fellows and doing more or less so like informational interviews with them ahead of time. That's a tip that I always recommend to people, no matter like where they're trying to go into, whatever job that they're trying to apply for. I'm a little bit curious. This is also like a little pivoting perhaps, but there's so many rounds of interviews. Like, how do you prevent burnout during that process? And also, I've heard so many like scary things about fellowship interviews, like that last round at ASHP. Like, if you're invited, that means like your chances of getting in are perhaps maybe higher, etc. It just all seems very like that networking piece is so important. How do you navigate through all of that, all of those scary emotions?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really tough, it's a very draining process, very scary, I will say, very anxiety inducing. So to answer your first question about the burnout, to be honest, I think interview burnout is really real, especially when you have to understand that first and foremost, you're a student and you have rotation expectations. And so understanding how you're going to manage your time between going to rotation and then missing time for interviews. I know that for me, I definitely had interview burnout. I think by the time I was done with interview season, I had done like 50 to 60 interviews maybe in the span of like 1.5 months it is, or 2 months. Um, but I think what's nice though is that as you continue to get that practice, you will see some of the same questions, and you're repeating some of your same answers over and over again. So it does get a little bit easier as time goes on and you get more practice. But I think it's really important at that time to take care of yourself. Make sure you are reaching out to friends and family who are supportive, and can kind of cheer you on through the process that's already very difficult. I know I had like wonderful friends and family that were continuously telling me I was doing a great job and to just kind of hang in there. So that was always nice, but also make sure you're taking time to take care of yourself. So setting apart time on the weekends and things like that, because the burnout is really real. I know that for all the interview time I was missing, I was working weekends. So I ended up working like 6 straight weekends or something like that during my rotation. So, there was, like, a period of time, I think, where I worked, like, 12 days in a row without a day off. So, it definitely can be difficult in terms of I think a lot of fellowship interviews, will ask you pretty standard questions, to be honest. There's always gonna be some programs that are, have some harder questions that may be a little bit more difficult to answer or require some more thought. But just try to go in as best prepared as you can. You can research those situational questions or behavioral questions. Just practice some of your interviews, think about your experiences you've had. And I think doing some of that preparation will also help ease the anxiety. But of course, it's always difficult, and it's not easy until you get to the end and you have fellowship in hand. And then I'm sorry, what was your last question?
No
That
worries. I realize I asked like a lot. So the second part is I've heard of really scary stories about like fellowships and the interview process, how there's a lot placed on the networking aspect and how you present yourself um, to pretty much probably anyone that you meet in the company. Um, how do you navigate having to go in knowing that all eyes are on you and your impression's going to matter?
Yeah, it's definitely really nerve-wracking, I will say. Like, a lot of the interview process is also kind of doing, like, receptions or virtual networking nights and things like that, where you're networking with the current fellows and you're also networking with some of the preceptors of the fellowship, and so I think the biggest piece of advice that I could give as someone who went through the process is just really be authentically yourself. When you're trying to be someone you're not, that's going to come across very easily, I think. And also, as much as you want to work with them, they also want to work with you. So it's all about the right fit. And so it's really important that, you are being your genuine self so that you can see, like, does it feel compatible? Like, is it a right fit for you to be working with those people for either a year or 2 years? Because that's a really long period of time. And so I think when you start thinking about the networking, less as networking and more so like trying to build like genuine, lasting relationships and connections, I think it takes some of that pressure off. Because I will say, everyone says that pharmacy is a very small world. So even if you don't end up as a fellow at their company, people are always switching jobs, switching companies, or you might see them later down the line when you're looking for jobs. So you always want to make a good impression, but um, be yourself. Talk about things that you're passionate about. Show them what your interests are, and they'll naturally want to they'll have questions for you, and just try to build as much of an authentic conversation as you can. So I really try not to think about it as networking, but rather just trying to get to know someone, and I feel like that really helps me.
Great advice. Thank you for that. So we're kind of reaching the end of the episode, actually. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about how you ended up deciding which fellowship you wanted to apply for and ultimately which one you accepted an offer from. So if you could dive a little bit more into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, everyone has different factors they're considering when they look at fellowship. Some factors that were important to me, I was really interested in doing like medical strategy. And so that's one thing. So I knew I wanted to be in medical affairs, but specifically within the functional area of medical affairs, I wanted to be working with strategy. So that was one thing, looking for positions that were more related to medical strategy. Another thing was therapeutic area. So, which disease state do you want to work in? Maybe that's a factor for you. For me, my number one choice for a disease area was actually HIV, because that's what I did my research in at UCSF during my time here. So that was always something that was the top of the list for me. But I really thought that I wasn't super picky about functional, or sorry, I wasn't super picky about disease state just because I thought that I could really gain any useful experience from any disease state. But, when you are applying, you want to make sure you know why you applied for that position and that disease state. So be able to speak on that. Um, and then some other things, location wasn't as important to me. I'm from Chicago. I'm no stranger to moving, moved from Toronto as well. So I was happy to end up pretty much anywhere. I will say that, there was a part of me that was thinking that I was going to end up on the East Coast just because there's so many fellowship programs and companies. More on the East Coast than the West Coast, I will say. But happy to have ended up here in SF for another year. But yeah, so location sometimes is important to people, depending on where you're from and where you want to be, and where you see yourself in the future. I think company is a big thing. Company culture was really important to me. Having my rotation at Gilead, I was able to see what a great workplace it was, and what a great work environment it was, and how the people there really took an invested interest in me and my career and my future, regardless of if it was for me to end up at Gilead or not. I met some wonderful mentors there, that I still keep in touch with today, and so I made a lot of long-lasting relationships and friendships there, and so I knew that was a big reason why I wanted to end up at Gilead for fellowship. And yeah, I think those are like the big things. Consider also if you want to do a 1 year or 2 year fellowship. That's another thing. Thinking about how much experience you're gonna get. I would say those were the big factors for me. Also thinking about the fellowship program, I knew I wanted to be part of a university affiliated program just because I like that aspect of being able to be involved with the university and the offerings that are provided through that, like doing research or being able to take classes at the university, things like that. So I would say those are big considerations I think a lot of people think about. But yeah.
Awesome. I didn't know that there was actually a lot more that goes into that process than I thought. So thank you for sharing about that.
Yeah.
And I'm also excited to see what you end up doing within the HIV population to help with the health outcome there. So awesome job. And then lastly, I guess you briefly talked about like the factors that you considered when applying, but what do you hope to gain out of your next year at Gilead?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm really grateful for the experiences I've gotten through pharmacy school and the ability to really build and develop my clinical foundation in pharmacy. But I'm really hoping to take that one step further and be able to develop my skills that will help me excel in an industry setting. And so that's really learning about strategy and what goes into the commercialization of a drug, and how you support the life cycle of a medication once it's out, on the market. And so I'm really looking forward to doing a lot of those roles and responsibilities, as a fellow, and really developing my skills that will help me in a more corporate setting, right? So I think pharmacy school prepares us very well for the science aspect of things, and so I'm ready to kind of develop the rest of the skills I will need, as a fellow and as someone who's hoping to work in the pharmaceutical industry in the future.
Yay! Awesome. I'm super, super excited for you. Keep me updated on how things go. So that concludes the episode for today. I want to remind listeners that if you have any questions, please send them in, or you can also DM us on any of our social media platforms, which includes YouTube, Instagram. We're also on Spotify and Apple Podcast. So please reach out for questions we will answer in future episodes. And thank you again, Keya, for coming on to this podcast to guest and talk about your experiences in fellowship. Listeners, tune in for the next episode. Again, if you have enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, like, and subscribe. Follow us on social media, all the usual. And yeah, I'll see you next time.